Sup? This is Greggatron. Happy New Year. How's everybody doing? Alright. Oh, and I hope you like my shirt. Yeah. Would you look at it? Look at it. Alright, today I'm talking about this. God of War Ragnarok on PlayStation 5. The launch edition. Good stuff. Where do I begin? So the launch edition comes with this free content. Both Kratos and Atreus get a free costume. And it kind of fits with the weather conditions. After the events of the first game, there's a deep freeze, as you can kind of see. Whereas in the first game, well, not the first game, but I guess you call this the fourth game, there's a lot of greenery and that sort of thing, whereas a lot of this is covered in ice as far as Midgard goes. And I'll talk about that a little later. But yeah, the launch edition, you get some costumes and little stuff like that, which doesn't really change anything per se, but it's cool to have some new, different stuff. So I guess I'll start with the storyline. It picks up 2 years after God of War, and Atreus is no longer a boy. You know how in the other game he'd say boy. He calls him Atreus now, or he says my son more. And you are really getting more of a bond this time around, I feel, because Kratos now has to see Atreus as a young man. He's really developing into a warrior. He's not a child anymore. And Kratos kind of has to deal with that. But at the same time, he wants to protect his son. But after a certain point, he knows he kind of can't because he's not a boy anymore. The boy has to make his own decisions. So there's almost a constant struggle between Kratos letting Atreus go and not letting him go. So that's cool. And to see the bond throughout the game is kind of beautiful, because Atreus really does love his father, and he wants what's best for his father. He doesn't want this man to fall, basically. And what's beautiful about this game is you get to see the mindset of both characters, both the God of War and the son. So you kind of have a feel for where both of them are coming from. Well, there's certain things that happen in this game with Atreus' life, but he can't tell his father because he thinks if he tells him, it could jeopardize something or make things worse. And he is doing everything he can to protect his father because he thinks or feels something bad might happen to him. So a lot of this game is about like honesty and trust between a father and son, and that's beautiful. Like that I could talk about for 10 minutes alone. But the tone seems a little darker thanks to the weather with Midgard. There's character development, not just with the two main characters, but all your allies, I'll put it this way, all your allies kind of feel like a family, like on some Lord of the Rings type stuff. And you find these bonds with these characters who you might not expect. Let's just put it that way. Your allies are some of the most helpful people in this game. And they will take you in directions you did not expect. Let's just put it that way. Let's talk about the enemies in this game. The enemies are crazy. The foes, just insane. So in the first game, in this game, you fight these things called the Valkyries. Remember them? Whereas in Ragnarok, they're still around, but you're fighting something totally different now. And they're called the Berserkers. The Berserkers are a pain. Straight pain. I don't think they're as bad as the Valkyries were in the other game, but still, they are a mug fighting. And I like the Berserkers because each Berserker has a different style of fighting. Like one of them used like lightning, one of them used ice, one of them you would fight two at the same time. A different one, you might have fought three at a time. One of them used like earth style. And then there's a boss berserker after you defeat, if and when you defeat all the other ones. But they're tough, man. Like, you have to be trained before you fight these guys. Like, your timing has to be right. Your armor, your weaponry, all that stuff. All that stuff has to be right before you fight these guys. You gotta be like mentally in it. Because the Berserkers are nothing to play with. You gotta have your runin, which is like magic. Your runin has to be right. But what's dope about this game is the costumes. There's different armors you can acquire, which is in every game, but each set of armor has different attributes. So like, for example, my favorite is probably like the dragon scale armor, where the shoulder pads go up. And he has a whole suit of that if you kill X amount of dragons. That's probably my favorite suit because it's like the best when it comes to offensive. But there's another suit for like the Raven's Tears, which was better for defense. And there's all these different combinations of suits you can get depending on what you're trying to do as far as have strength, runic, defense, you name it. So that's cool. I was talking about dragons earlier. The dragons are another boss that's pretty challenging. Not as bad as the Berserkers, but any foe in this game has the capacity to kill you. That's the difference between these games and the PlayStation 3 game, God of War 3. Because that was more hack and slash, whereas this is more calculated. Straight up. As far as dodging and parrying and blocking and all that stuff. But there's some lifelong lessons again. The lessons pretty much continue in this game. Like the conversations don't go anywhere. If anything, they just get deeper. I really like the dwarves. I really like the theme of, you know, in the first game they talked about Odin a lot. This game, it's called Ragnarok, right? This game, the Odin stuff is coming to pass, whether they like it or not. They're pretty much put in a position where they kind of have to fight this guy. And I'll kind of leave it at that. But I want to talk about the realms. So one thing I didn't like as much in this game, the realms, the lighting is really hard to see and kind of make out what certain things are. The lighting looks like way too light. And yeah, I know you can change that in the settings when you first open up the game, but even if you do that, for some reason the graphics just look off in this game. Like, it doesn't look as beautiful as this game, right? So, like, take Midgard, for example. Everything's covered in snow and ice. So you just don't get that feel of appreciating the land as much as the other game. And instead of rowing your boat, you have a sleigh with these wolves, which that's cool. You know, you got different means of transportation. But Midgard pretty much looks the same throughout now. And then you got Svartalfheim, that's the dwarfs realm. That's a pretty cool realm, but still, the graphics look off. Like, the lighting, it just looks way too bright. And you can't see all the little details that you might have seen in the previous game. Helheim kind of looks the same. But I'm just going to say this for the sake of time. This game has better graphics than this game. That's a fact. This game has better graphics. Speaking of the realms, my favorite realm is probably Muspelheim. Probably. Because that's the realm where there's these challenge maps. And they really went in when it came to the challenges. So there's these different areas with different combinations of fight sequences. And once you get all the combinations, you can do these even bigger fights in this big arena-looking place. Muspelheim is pretty much the lava realm. So anyway, once you do all of those fights, you get even more bonuses and what have you. But I really like those challenges. Like, one of them, you're fighting different bosses. You know, one of them is called the Ring Challenge. You have to stay inside this ring, because if you go outside of it, you burn. There's another one where you fight, well, that's the one with the bosses, where you fight this, it's like an orb, and it's got all these things wrapped around it. It's kind of like it's like a Bayonetta boss. Anyway, I can't remember what they call it, but that thing is crazy. The challenge map is just crazy. Let's just leave it at that. And it really did add to the game, which that's good. Now, real quick, the best thing about this game probably is Valhalla. So Valhalla is free DLC if you don't know. And basically, after you beat the game, you start... Well, I shouldn't say that. After you beat the game, you go to Valhalla, and you're stripped of everything you own. So you basically have to start from scratch, if you want to do Valhalla, that is, which you can back out whenever you want. Well, you start from nothing, and you have to continue doing these missions over and over until you get to the boss. But if the boss kills you, you start right back where you started. But you still have the stuff that you acquired over the mission. So you don't lose everything whenever you die. You just have to start from square one to get back to the boss. And each time you'll kind of get closer and closer to that boss. And let me say this, that boss, the character who's the boss in Valhalla, he or she is probably the best thing about the game. I mean, I'll talk about the things I didn't like here in a second, but thanks to Valhalla, that totally saved the game. Because prior to Valhalla, I was like, man, what's going on? But after you play the DLC, which is free, I'm like, all right, that made up for the mistakes. So, speaking of mistakes, I talked about the lighting. It's kind of hard to make out what stuff is. But the main, well, before I even get into that, let's talk about the pacing. So throughout the game, you get to play as Atreus, which is good. Because you get to see, again, you get to see things from someone else's point of view. The only thing about the Atreus missions, for one, we all know he's not going to be as powerful as Kratos, which makes sense. But the thing about Atreus is his missions are kind of boring compared to Kratos. Because when you're Kratos, you're used to getting into some stuff. Whereas Atreus, he's more focused on knowledge and gaining information and, you know, keeping secrets, things of that nature. So you're almost like a detective / explorer when it comes to Atreus. There's obviously going to be some combat in it. It's just not as entertaining as when you're Kratos. There was something else I was going to say about Atreus. When you're Atreus, it becomes slow at times. Like, the game is about Ragnarok, right? So when you're Atreus, you get to go to Asgard, which is a good thing. But when you go to Asgard, I was wanting... Well, I'm not going to say that because I don't want to spoil that, but the missions you're doing in Asgard, they get slow. Let's just put it that way. But there's build up to what I'm going to talk about here in a minute. So that the stuff with Atreus has to happen in order for the last scene to happen. But I'll just leave it at that. The pacing is kind of off when you're Atreus. But when you meet back with your father, it all kind of comes back into a swing of things. It just seems kind of slow. But you're watching a movie when you're playing this game. So, like, I get it. But at the same time, like, I want to jump in and, you know, slaughter folks. So another thing I didn't like was you only fight 3 gods for the most part. You fight Heimdall, Thor, and Thor's a badass, man. Thor is crazy. I want to say you fight him at least twice, but Thor is one of the best things about this game. I'll leave it at that. And then Odin, obviously, because all the build-up from this game is in Ragnarok. So you know you're going to face Odin at some point. But I wanted you to fight more gods. That's a complaint I had. Now, probably my biggest complaint was not necessarily Odin himself, but it was the war at the end. I felt like the war, they should have gone more so all out. And if you play the game, you might agree or disagree, but I felt like that war should have been more grand. It should have been like much bigger. I felt like you spent a lot of time in Asgard as Atreus, doing your missions, but when you get to Asgard for Ragnarok, it seemed short. You know what I'm saying? And there's a scene where in Asgard, when you're Atreus, you see the Valkyries training, and you see like a bunch of people who, you know, work for Odin or who live in Asgard in general. But those people weren't really there when it came to the final battle. Now, there's a scene where you're in Muspelheim, and you have to do something in order to acquire something, in order to proceed forward. Well, those bad guys who were in Asgard, they're there on Muspelheim. You see them. But I just wanted more of that in the final battle. Does that make sense? Like, I wanted all hell to break loose once you get to Asgard. And I just didn't really feel that. It's called God of War, Ragnarok, but the last war, the actual war didn't feel like much of a war, in my opinion. And as far as Odin goes, I was not impressed with Odin. Now, when you play it on the harder difficulty, it's harder to beat him then. But even then, like, I wasn't impressed with his abilities. He was alright. He didn't feel anything like Thor. Like, Thor was really tough, in my opinion. Thor, in my opinion, was the greatest foe, or at least one of them. But Odin just felt kind of watered down. He had cool abilities, but they've been talking about this man the entire game of the last game. And then when you finally fight him, you're like, oh, alright. Like, I thought there was going to be more to him than what they gave us. So, that's the gist of it. So those are the things I didn't like, but thanks to Valhalla, it kind of made up for the detriments, I guess you could call them. So, this game's good, but it's not perfect. Like, the story's really good. The timing is off. The character development's really good. But the final battle seemed off. And there's going to be a third one. So, which one's superior? This one, by far. Like, this game's perfect, in my opinion. They did everything right in this game. Whereas this game, they continue to do some of those things. They built on the relationships. They built on the story. But some of the execution, in my opinion, could have been better. Now, this game has a twist in it, which really blew me away. I forgot to mention that. There's a twist in here that's like really good. I was like, wow, I never had my head spin from a video game like that. But I don't know. It's like there was just too much wrong with it in order for it to be as good as this one. It's still good. It's just not touching. And that's why I think they made the Valhalla stuff, because they kind of knew something was wrong. Whereas God of War PS4 didn't need a Valhalla or a DLC, not that I know of. But it's fun, it's entertaining. I spent more hours actually on Ragnarok than the other one, thanks to Valhalla. So, I'm not trying to dog this game out, but if you get this, make sure you download Valhalla for after you beat the game. Because it's so much more appreciative worthy after you play Valhalla. And I'm not trying to say that Valhalla saved the game, but it definitely increased the replay value. Let's just put it that way. So, overall, good stuff. It's probably like a 8.5 out of 10, maybe a 9, because of the things I talked about. So, I don't know what you guys think. My next video game review will probably be Ghost of Tsushima, but we'll see. And I will talk to you in the next video. Peace.